All right. Welcome aboard, sailors. Today on The Pirate Therapist, we're diving back into the wild seas of stories. This time to where we're going to talk about how to explore the tales that we grew up with, and we're quietly training our hearts and our minds with fairy tales and fables and folk stories. They're not just to tuck our kids into bed. They're there to teach us what to fear and who to trust and how to be brave. And what does happily ever after mean? What's it supposed to look like? So, in this episode, we're asking, what are these stories really trying to teach us? How do they help us practice big emotions like fear, jealousy, hope, grief in a safe or an imagined space? And when does a story stop being helpful and start becoming a burden? So, to help us navigate, I have invited a guest who has sailed deep into the dark forests of Grimm's fairy tales. He loves these stories. They're not just about the witches and the wolves for him, but the way they reveal the shadows and the strengths inside of us. Together, we're going to look at how Grimm's tales can shape our morals, our coping skills, and even the way we understand danger and safety as adults. So grab a lantern, keep close to the path, and don't worry, we're going to leave a trail of breadcrumbs as we go. I am Lee Perry, the pirate therapist, and I would like to welcome back for a return visit Lance McDreamy. Hi, Lance.
Woo! Hey, how's it going?
Good morning, sir.
Good morning. We're doing this nice and early today, so we are good to go. We're ready to do it.
Fantastic.
Okay.
So I'm going to let you jump in.
Okay.
How about we start with what first drew you to Grimm's fairy tales? What keeps you coming back?
Honestly, I'm not sure what it is that I love about them exactly, but I can tell you my first instance with them was my very first play I ever did was it was called the Brothers Grimm Spectaculathon, and it was a comedy, and it was supposed to be combining all the Brothers Grimm stories into one cohesive story together, and it was just really funny throughout, and I loved it. So there was that, and then later on, I ended up performing in Into the Woods, and I played Jack in that, and it reminded me, I was like, oh my gosh, I love these stories. These are so good. They're so fun. And then since then, I just wanted to keep combining them together. And well, I should say that I decided after that, I was like, hold on a second. There are so many different ways that you can combine these stories together. But yeah, that's how I'm doing my stuff now, combining my stories together and making my own story out of it, if that makes sense. I don't know. I just always thought they were super
You're still
interesting.
doing the videos?
Oh yeah. I'm actually I've started writing it into a book. So
Fantastic.
I'm doing the videos, and I started a book as well because the videos take a long time. But I was like, I could probably get a book and get a lot of my ideas down.
All
So
right. So what's the book about?
it's the same thing, except I'm expanding a lot upon what's in the videos because you can do so much in movies, you can do so much in videos, but you can expand a lot more upon the lore, upon the world, upon the story and characters in book form. So I've been having a lot of fun writing all that down and exploring the world more. I've been creating a world map recently, so that's been kind of fun. I've been it's kind of been fun as well because a lot of the Brothers Grimm stories are German,
Mhm.
and they come from Germany and that culture. So I've been trying to teach myself a little bit about German stuff and um, trying to use German inspired names for a lot of stuff. It's been kind of fun. But yeah, I like it.
When you think of Grimm's fairy tales, what's the first feeling or image that comes to your mind?
I would say adventure. Like I get excited thinking about them. I think they're really interesting because there's such a wide variety of stories in there. I have this one. I don't know if you show the video or not during the episode. I can't remember. But
Yes.
so in case not, you do?
Yeah.
Okay, then yeah, you saw that. But anyone who didn't, it's just Grimm's Complete Fairy Tales. I don't really know how to tell you exactly what version, but there's a million different versions of Grimm's fairy tales. But um, anyway, if you mine has 211 stories in it. If you look at it, it's got everything from a story about um, ears of corn being bigger and now they're small, and then everything up to giant stories of betrayal and murder and friendship and hope and adventure and mythical places and stupid people. I don't know. It's got such a wide variety of random things that I think they're awesome.
Do you see Grimm's fairy tales as mostly dark and disturbing, or do you see them as wise and helpful?
So that's another thing. I think there's a wide assortment, but I don't see them as nearly dark and disturbing as people normally say they are. There are dark instances in stories. Like I'll tell you about one later once we get into it. That some of them do get really dark, but I don't think they're quite as dark as everyone makes them out to be. Because the thing is at their core, as the Grimms have rewritten them, they are meant to be used to teach children.
Okay. What do you think they're trying to teach?
So a lot of them honestly, a lot of them are very basic things. There's either A, Christian principles. That's one thing that the Grimms put a lot of them into is just, follow God, follow your heart, stuff like that. That's one of the biggest ones that the Grimms put in a lot of. The second one that I would say is up there is honestly just don't be stupid. There's so many stories in here that are about just stupid people messing stuff up because they're stupid.
Okay. Can you share an example of that?
Yeah. So hold on, I had one here. Um, okay, right here. So there's this one story in here, Frederick and Catherine. I have not reread the whole thing in a little bit, but I have a whole bunch of notes on all of the stories. And this one's a pretty good lengthy story. And in this story, basically, Frederick and his wife Catherine, um, they just are going out and they're doing a bunch of random stuff. And Catherine, his wife, just messes all of it up, basically. And there isn't really like a conclusive ending to it. It's just she messes up again and does something stupid, and then the devil gets involved and causes a bunch of problems. And
Okay.
then Frederick's just like, "Oh, what the heck, wife? That was stupid." And that's it. That's it. It's a really long story, and that's all it is. But then at the same time, there are quite a few stories, like, let's see here, The Golden Bird, that I wouldn't say the Golden Bird. So this one, it's about three brothers. Two of them are smart. They're the king's favorite brothers or sons. They do everything right, but they're very prideful. So I'd say that's more the message here because it describes the third as, let me see if I can find it here. But basically, it describes the third as like slow, not as smart, and just the least favorite of the three, basically. That he's the least likely to be able to achieve things. And then in the end, the two end up being a lot more prideful. It kind of gives me a bit of a, if you know the story of the prodigal son from the Bible,
Yeah.
it gives me some vibes of that because the premise of the story at the beginning is that this father says to his sons, he says, "Okay, I'm gonna tell you guys how to go get this golden bird." Okay, uh, it's part of like a prove yourself type thing to get the throne. And the first part of it is you have to go to this town that has these two inns, these two taverns. There's going to be one that is a lot more bright, happy, blah blah blah. Then there's one that's just gonna be run down and boring. Says you're gonna be tempted by the bright one, go to the other one. But the first two sons, it talks about how they both went off and they spent all their father's money at the bright, happy one because they were prideful. They just didn't want to go to the other one. And then the third son goes to that one. So while there is lots of warnings about being stupid, there's also lots of warnings about being prideful and sometimes appearing as the stupid one and how that's not necessarily a bad thing. I don't know. It's like I said, there's a lot of variety in these stories and they're all over the place.
Okay. Well, how do these stories teach differently than like modern stories?
So they're a lot more straightforward, I would say, with what they're trying to say. Like, well, I guess no, not necessarily. They teach a lot more bold lessons. I guess, might be the thing, with a lot more conclusive, like, negative connotations behind things. So a lot of the times there will be, if you make a bad choice in these stories, or even your parents make a bad choice, then you die, or your arm gets cut off, or you get sold to the devil, or blah 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 blah. But then what I think is interesting is that behind all of those, except maybe the death one, so there are a lot of ones that just end with they die. But there are other ones, most anytime, like, it brings up the devil, for instance, or there's one story called The Girl with No Arms. That's one that comes to mind. And it's about this girl that her dad makes this deal with the devil, not knowing it's the devil. Where he gets like infinite wealth in exchange for whatever is currently behind his house. So he's like, "Oh yeah, sure, it's just my tree that I don't really care about." Sure. And he goes back and finds out that his daughter was behind his house. So technically, he's supposed to give the devil his daughter, but his daughter cries so much that she like washes herself with her tears, basically, and she's too clean for the devil to touch her. And long story short, she ends up having to cut off her arms because of what the devil said, and then she eventually sets off on her own and ends up marrying this king, and the king makes her some silver arms, and then the devil shows up again. I don't remember exactly what he does, but they end up overcoming the devil, reuniting with her family, and her arms grow back. And she ends up marrying and having her happily ever after.
Do you think that the violence and the fear and the grief in these stories are they serving a purpose?
So at the time when these stories were written, there were, I don't know, things like that were a lot more common. And one thing to remember is that these stories date back thousands of years, some of them. I did a report for a college class a little bit ago, not too long ago, where I talked a lot about that. And um one of my favorite stories, probably my favorite story. This one isn't necessarily a Grimm story. It can be, it cannot be, depending on who you ask about it. But the classic story of Jack and the Beanstalk. So, Jack and the Beanstalk is one of the oldest stories in the world. It dates back thousands and thousands of years through many different cultures, through many different variations, blah, 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 blah. And it has included many different things over the years. But, like, I got thinking about Jack and the Beanstalk, and I'm like, "What exactly is this story trying to teach?" Because it's about, a boy going up and stealing from a giant, and honestly, the giant's just minding his own business. Like, the giant didn't do anything. But, of course, we are meant to interpret that the giant is the antagonist, and he is trying to stop Jack from stealing all his stuff. But because Jack perseveres, he's able to do so. Now, the we see modern connotation not connotations, modern examples of Jack and the Beanstalk where they change it to make it more clear that the giant is the antagonist, that Jack is the protagonist, that he is doing it purely because he wants to help provide a better life for people around him. Maybe that the giants are attacking. I think I never seen the movie, but Jack and the Giant Slayer, the giants are. I'm pretty sure the plot of that one is the giants are coming down and like attacking people. So Jack goes up and fights them. So you see, like modern versions, we have to make it more clear that there's a good guy and a bad guy. These stories are just meant to be there are just people, and some are more clear cut good, some more clear cut bad. But the more realistic stories in all these make it clear that everyone is just people and they're making choices. Now, there are good choices and bad choices you can make. So do your best to make the good choice.
Okay. Do you think that these stories give children or adults, I suppose, kind of a rehearsal space to face scary situations using their imagination before they run into them in real life? You think they prepare people for later in life?
Yeah, I think they definitely can. Like thinking of the story of well, like some classic examples. Everybody knows these ones. Little Red Riding Hood or
Hmm.
Hansel and Gretel. They both teach you be prepared. Or the primary lesson from Hansel and Gretel, not Hansel and Gretel, Little Red Riding Hood, I would say comes from the line that Little Red Riding Hood is told by her parents, stay on the path, don't wander from the path. That can be used in a literal sense or in a more metaphoric sense. You know, we are oftentimes given uh, a path by which our life will be easiest, or whether or about how we can avoid situation A or B. And if we stick to the path, then we will avoid those situations that we don't want to be a part of, where otherwise we might run into the wolves and the bad things in the forest. Or like with Hansel and Gretel, they are being tricked by their mother in that story and being led out into the forest and being left there. But I believe, if I'm remembering correctly, it's been a while since I've read that one originally, but I believe they're actually let out into the forest 2 or 3 times before they
Hmm.
finally officially lost. But they tried to prepare themselves every time by, getting the breadcrumbs. Of course, that wasn't quite enough. The It talks about how birds came up and picked up their trail, so they couldn't find their way back. But they tried to be prepared, and they worked together. It's about teamwork. It's about being with those you love and working through those challenges together, like the witches, the wolves, all those things we come across in our lives, like with Little Red Riding Hood. In the end of the story, that the wolf gets them both, but they're saved by the huntsman. The huntsman comes in and kills the wolf, and then if you want the more graphic details, they take the wolf and they stuff it full of rocks and throw the wolf into a lake. And the wolf is portrayed as still alive when that happens. So you could take that as a more metaphorical thing for sometimes we ourselves, when we make a bad choice and we stray from the path, that we might not necessarily be able to pull ourselves out of it. But someone else who knows what they're doing, the huntsman, he's hunted wolves before. He knows how to deal with this kind of stuff. He comes in and he can get rid of the wolves for us. I don't know. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but it seems a little odd that a guy experienced with wolves would fill his belly full of rocks and throw them in a lake.
Yeah, no, that's very fair. I have no idea what to tell you about that part.
I don't know any hunters that do that.
No,
But
it's not a common practice.
so, what are some of the recurring values or warnings that you see in Grimm's fairy tales? I think you already kind of hit on that a little bit, but what does it teach us about trust and promises and greed or kindness and obedience? What about these things?
I mean, I would say pretty much those things you just said as examples are like the biggest things that there are in this. Obedience to the people who are trying to instruct you. Often in these stories there is a wise person who's instructing them. For example, some of the bigger stories that often feature that. So there's a lot of stories about, the king is sending out his sons for whatever reason. There's at least like 10 or 15 stories with that exact premise. A lot of the stories are the same thing, slight variations on them. But yeah, obedience is a big one. Kindness is a really big one as well. Not being prideful or greedy. One of my favorites. I'll tell you this one. This is arguably one of the darkest, as far as when you think of like dark things that typical Grimm stories include. But I also think it's one of the best stories. I really like this one, and it's like one of the ones that it's one of the longest ones, so you get a lot of the story. But it's called the Juniper Tree, and in the Juniper Tree, you know this one.
I do.
Yep, yep. Okay, so in the juniper tree, this family, it's kind of got a similar beginning esque to Cinderella. Now, this I'll throw this in as a little fun fact. So originally, a lot of these stories were just about mom and dad, and then they did these bad things. But often it was depicted as the mother who was doing all the bad things, and they're like, well, a typical Christian value they wanted to teach was that motherhood and things like that were sacred. So they substituted all the mothers for stepmothers. And I just think that's really funny. So now it's all the evil stepmothers and evil stepsisters and blah, blah, blah. So in this story, you have an evil stepmother, and she marries this kind man. And the man has 2 kids, a brother and a sister. Or no, sorry, he has a brother. The stepmother has a sister, and that's a daughter. So but the daughter is very kind. So they're all living together. The dad goes to work, and yeah, mother is like, what? I'm gonna kill this kid. I'm gonna kill the son because I want my daughter to inherit everything from the family. Even though we're not planning on dying anytime soon, I'm just gonna get him out of the way. I don't know, but she's like, oh, go get an apple from that chest over there. So the boy goes over, he gets an apple from the chest, and then she closes the chest on him, chops his head clean off. And then the mom's like, "Oh shoot, well now they're gonna know I killed him. I better make it so that they don't know that." So she ties his head back on with a red ribbon, and then the the daughter comes home and her mom's like, "Hey, go ask your brother for this. And if he says no, or if he doesn't say anything, just give him a good old box on the ear." So she goes up to her brother and says, "Brother, why aren't you blah blah blah?" And he doesn't respond, because he's dead. And she goes up and gives him a box on the ear, and his head falls off. And she's like, "Oh my goodness gracious, I just killed my brother." And the mom comes in and is like, "Can't believe you did that. That's messed up." Well, I don't remember exactly how this happens next, but she goes and the mom, somehow without the daughter knowing, takes the boy's body and uses it in a stew for dinner that night. Again, I don't remember the exact details of how this works here, but neither the daughter nor the father know. But the daughter takes the boy's bones and buries them underneath a juniper tree. And then after that, this bird shows up. And we find out pretty fast that this bird is like a reincarnation of the boy. And he goes around to all these places and he collects some fancy shoes, some gold, and a giant miller's stone. And then he comes back and he sings this song throughout it. It's like a quit, quit, what a beautiful bird am I. And then the rest of his song talks about how he was killed by his mother, his father and sister ate him, and blah blah blah. But at the end of the story, he shows up, or the bird shows up to his family, and his sister's like, "What a beautiful song! I'm gonna go outside." So she goes outside, and the bird drops these shoes onto her, and she's like, "Oh, cool! This bird gave me these cool shoes." And the dad's like, "Well, I like the bird song. I want to see if the bird will give me anything." So he goes outside, and the bird drops some gold, and he gets some gold. And then the stepmother is just tortured this whole time because she realizes this song is the boy. And she's just like freaking out the whole time. But then at the same time, she sees the other two come in with all these like good things. And she's like, "Well, I want to see if the bird will give me anything." So she goes outside and the bird drops the miller's stone on her head and kills her. So it's got some, I don't know if I would necessarily, I mean, I guess it could be classified as like a revenge theme, but I guess I would more classify it as a sort, I don't know, almost like retribution of sorts. That's um it A lot of the stories just go to show that people who do bad things get what's coming to them in the end, I guess. And as long as you're doing your best to do good, that you will be rewarded despite bad things that may have happened to you because of other people. Because then the boy turns back to human and reunites with his brother or his sister and father, and they have a happy ending.
They didn't miss her though, huh?
No, 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 they
That the
they don't really
daughter and
talk
the
about her after
father are
that.
like,
They just like drop the stone on her head, and then everyone's like, "Okay."
"Oh, it's Tuesday. Let's continue."
Exactly.
So, can you think of any lessons that are taught in Grimm's fairy tales that perhaps didn't age well or could even potentially be seen as harmful if they're taken literally?
I mean, off the top of my head, I'm not entirely sure. I mean, you could look at like um depending what avenue you want to go down to look at this, you could look at like the feminist route, for instance. But even then, like a lot of the stories in this do, I mean, in my opinion, a pretty good job at portraying women doing a large variety of things. Like there's actually one story, like the seven huntsmen or something like that, that's all about women going out and being these huntsmen and doing some crazy stuff, and they end up like protecting the whole kingdom, blah blah blah. So I really do think that there's stories for just about everything in here. So off the top of my head, I cannot think of any, but I can tell you one that's a little crazy, that I wouldn't
Just
recommend
one?
taking. Yeah, I can tell you one that's a little crazy, and I would not do what they do here. But there's one called Clever Hans. Hans is a recurring character in these, and there's lots of stories about a guy named Hans. And in this one, it's about him when he was a kid, and he's trying to impress his childhood crush Gretel. So Gretel comes up and talks about like, "Oh my gosh, I don't even know. Wish I had some bread." So Hans goes and he gives her a bunch of bread. And then I wish I had some books. He goes and gives her a bunch of books. And this happens like This is like 3 pages of literally just that. Just, her just saying stuff and then him just going and throwing a bunch of it at her. And then and then she comes to him one day and says, "Hans, I don't remember exactly what it is, but says something just general to the effect of like being able to see or something like that." And then he throws a bunch of cow eyes at her, and that's the end of the story. That's the whole thing. So, I mean, I guess if you're trying to impress your crush, don't throw cow eyes at them. That's a pretty
Yes,
that's
don't
a
don't take that literally.
yeah, don't take that literally.
Okay.
But besides that, honestly, I think that the stories do a pretty good job at making it clear what is the right thing to do they're trying to teach versus what is the wrong thing. And generally, the right things they're trying to teach, I feel like are still all very relevant lessons to today.
Are you familiar with Aesop's fables?
Not nearly as much as Grimm's. It's one I want to dive into eventually, but
I'm just wondering how you would compare Aesop's fables from Grimm's fairy tales.
remind me a few of Aesop's fables just so I can
Oh,
refresh my head here.
you're gonna put me on the spot.
Uh-huh, I know, I'm gonna look them up as well just so I can remind myself here.
I haven't done any Aesop's fables in probably since grade school. So
Okay, so the fables are they're oftentimes wow, there's over
they use a
700
lot
of
of
those.
anthropomorphism
Yeah.
using animals and stuff.
Okay, speaking of animals, my cat just decided to join us here. Likes to come and hang out behind the window here. Alright, honestly,
There's one that you've probably heard of, The Ant and the Grasshopper.
I feel like I have heard of that. I'm not sure off the top of my head,
That was
though.
one where the grasshopper wants to play and he'll sit there and he'll play his violin and all of that. And the ants are busy and the grasshopper kind of makes fun of the ants, but the ants are storing up food for winter and the grasshopper just wants to play and plays his music and doesn't prepare for winter. And then when winter comes, the ants are all kind of shut up in their little ant hill and the grasshopper doesn't have any food and he's starving and because he wanted to play instead of prepare. That was a pretty
So
common one.
So this is kind of interesting. I'm just looking it up. And it says Aesop's fables. They're credited to Aesop, a slave and storyteller who lived in ancient Greece between 620 and 564 BCE. So that's really interesting. I don't know. I'd have to look up into them a bit more specifically to see how similar the stories are now versus what they told then. But I mean, just comparing that one compared to, there are many Grimm stories that are anthropomorphic. They're about animals, about taking on human qualities. And let's see, I don't have any that come to mind right off the bat. I haven't spent as much time with those stories. There's like the Bremen Town Musicians, which is about a series of animals that come through and well, they become musicians and just blow away the whole town. But I don't remember what the full story behind that one was or like what it's trying to teach. I haven't spent as much time with the animal stories while I've been writing my stuff. But you could also look at here's one. Straw, coal, and bean. Have you heard of straw, coal, and bean?
I'm not familiar with that one.
So straw, coal, and bean it's about a piece of straw, a piece of coal, and a bean. And they're all living. This is probably the one off the top of my head that's arguably the closest to one of Aesop's fables. So it is about the straw, coal, and bean, and they're trying to leave to get away from where they're at. So they do that, and they overcome all these obstacles together. Um, and then they finally come to this last obstacle where they have to cross a river. So the straw is like, all right, well, here's what we're gonna do. I am the tallest, so I will lay myself down across the river, and then you guys will cross. So they're like, okay, great. So the straw does just that. He lays himself down across the river, and then the bean crosses. Um, and then after that, the coal crosses. But the coal is depicted as burning hot, and it burns straight through the hay or the straw, and then they both fall into the river and die, and the bean leaves by itself. Um, so yeah, it's just meant to be saying that like some people, even though you're spending time together and trying to work together, some people just I guess aren't meant to work
Compatible?
well, compatible to work well with each other. is what I would imagine that that one is kind of teaching, and inevitably those people will bring you down because it's not necessarily that the coal and the straw were like bad for each other in other ways. Like they're never. I'm not. I'm pretty sure that there aren't any points in the story where they're like arguing or anything like that. Like they get along pretty well the whole time, but then just in the end, the coal ends up bringing straw down with it because of well, I shouldn't say that because straw has its weakness as well. You know, it's a very flimsy thing, and of course, a piece of coal is going to bring that down. So, just because of their own individual weaknesses, when it comes to this specific challenge, they end up bringing each other down.
Okay, so
So,
what's the moral there?
well, that's where I would say that Grimm's fairy tales and Aesop's fables are a little bit different. Is that Grimm's fairy tales don't always have morals, they always have lessons, but they may not necessarily have morals. Does that make
Okay,
sense?
I think so.
Yeah, so like with Aesop's fables, a lot of them are teaching you something. It's not going to explicitly say what it is, like with the one you were talking about. The lesson is, you know, work hard, play later, right? Like something to that effect. Or I'm pretty sure like the tortoise and the hare would count as one of Aesop's fables.
I think so.
Yeah. Yeah. And that one, the lesson of that one is, I mean, it's pretty much the same thing. Work hard, play later, you know? Don't don't slow down and expect everyone else to just suck well so you can take a nap. I don't know. Whereas Brothers Grimm stories, there isn't really a way to classify them as specifically this versus that. I would say a majority of them do more lessons. A lot of them will tell you pretty straight out what the lesson is. A lot of them do leave them a little more open-ended for you to say, "Okay, well," um, for interpretation, like with the straw and bean. Uh, and then there are a few that are just like, "I have no idea what that was trying to teach." Like, there's one that it's just about this magical bowl of porridge that destroys an entire town because it just keeps producing porridge that destroys the town because no one stops it from doing that. I don't know. There's a there's a wide variety. So there isn't really a clear-cut way, I would say, to just say Grimm versus Aesop's. But if I
Okay.
did have to say, that's what I would say.
I, well, is there a particular Grimm's fairy tale that you personally feel connected to, one that stands out above all others?
Like I said, it's not necessarily a Grimm story, but Jack and the Beanstalk. I love that story. I've loved that one. I always have loved that one because at its core, it's about a um boy trying to be more than he is. And I feel like a lot of us can connect with something like that. You know, we have our circumstances in life, and of course, Jack in the story is depicted as poor, that he doesn't really have much and whatnot. And while there are a lot of people who can relate to that, not necessarily everybody can, and that's okay because at the end of the day, I feel like it's a pretty universal thing that everybody strives for more than they may have in life. And that's not, I don't believe, necessarily like stemming from pride and not being content with one's life because like for example like with me like I'm content with my life. I have a lot of really good things going in my life. I'm very happy with the things I do, but at the same time like I have the capability to try to shoot for more, so I wouldn't I, you know?
Well,
And
I think
yeah,
it's
go ahead.
really important for all of us to be content with where we're at, but to also push for better because a lot of our
Yes,
happiness comes through achievement, through accomplishment. And
through
so
achievement and
when we are
growth. Yeah,
yeah, when we want to trying to grow, we are happy. So in that sense, we should keep pushing forward, but we should also be content with what we have. If we are able to cover our needs and we have a roof over our head, food on our table, we should be okay with that while still trying to improve things, but not to the point that you're always trying to improve things and never appreciating what you have now.
exactly. Exactly. And that's what I think is so interesting. Like if we go to the story of Into the Woods, I love that musical because I think it does such a good job at portraying exactly that. That it shows all these people who have the things in their life, but they just it's not necessarily that they aren't content, it's that they refuse to be content. And that's what leads to them setting out on their journeys to except for Little Red Riding Hood and that she kind of just gets caught up in it. But like Jack, for example, in Into the Woods, he just refuses to be content with what he has, and that ends up causing, like, a whole series of problems, and, like, because he goes up the beanstalk multiple times. He comes back, and now he's got all the gold he could ever want, but now he's like, "Okay, well, I'm not happy with what I have now. I want more," and he goes up and he gets more, and I think it's so interesting because in that story, I'd say this is what draws me most to the Grimm's stories and like Into the Woods, for example, is that the characters aren't necessarily protagonists, they aren't necessarily antagonists. And I think that's where a lot of people, for anyone who is familiar with Into the Woods, a lot of people don't like it. A lot of people have a hard time with it. And I believe that stems from the fact that none of the characters are really written to be likable protagonists. They're just meant to be like real people because they're all people with problems. They're all people who are not content with their lives. They're always striving for more, and what they have isn't quite enough. So they keep going for more until the very end of the story, they realize they have each other and that they should be happy with each other. So that's where it ends, is them being content with what they have. But until then, it's just continuously everybody going for more and more and more until it reaches a breaking point and everyone dies. So yeah, yeah, that's my thoughts and all that. Is that
Okay.
yeah.
So, if a listener wanted to start exploring Grimm's fairy tales as a tool, as something to teach, where would you recommend they start? Is there a place, a jumping off point that you would recommend?
Not necessarily. Honestly, I think that there's a lot of stories in here that you just have never heard of, like Hans my Hedgehog, all these ones about Thumbling. There's several about princes and princesses and seven kingdoms. There's a lot of Beauty and the Beast variant stories. There's a lot of ones about they're very all over the place. I would say the best way to start is just find a collection of them and just start reading them because there isn't really like an order to them. You got all your classic ones, Rapunzel, Hansel, and Gretel, but then you also have like one about the story of the youth who went forth to learn what fear was. And that one's a really interesting one about a boy who, he's never been afraid. He's never known what that's like. So he decides he wants to go and learn to be afraid and figure out what that's like. There is the straw, the coal, and the bean. There's the snake leaves. The snake leaves is an interesting one about these leaves that are gifted the ability to heal anything, including death. So stuff like that. Yeah, I would say honestly, all of them can teach you lessons. Just dive in and see what you can find.
Okay. Well, I think that stories help us make sense of ourselves. They teach us perhaps how to connect with others and find meaning in perhaps some of the experiences, both positive and negative, that happen to us. They kind of give shape to chaos and they turn experience into something that we can understand. And it can create a sense of community when you're struggling with something and you read a story that's like, oh, well, that's how I feel. All of a sudden, you don't feel necessarily so alone. You feel like maybe somebody else has had that experience. So you're not out there by yourself, the only one to ever experience whatever happened. And I think stories are very good at teaching in a safe way. They help us to perhaps feel connected, perhaps learn a moral or a lesson and teaches us how to push forward. When we do a narrative approach in therapy, it uses stories on purpose. People can tell or retell or reshape their stories in a way to challenge any kind of harsh belief like, oh, I'm broken. Well, let's challenge that. And let's replace it with a more truthful or compassionate story, which would be something to the effect of this horrible thing happened to me. I made it through it, but it was hard, but I'm here and I'm safe now. And so using a narrative approach to therapy can be done that way. And so you can tell your story through talking, through writing, through artwork, and all of these can reduce depression and anxiety, even PTSD. And it can help you feel things perhaps you didn't have words for. A story can help you find those words. It can help you name and work through some of these emotions instead of just staying numb and overwhelmed. Storytelling is a safe way to perhaps reach somebody who is scared. So, in hearing other people's stories, it can help people feel understood and less alone. It can introduce new coping skills, new ideas that might help us get through a particularly difficult time. And that's important when it comes to mental health. So, research shows us that engaging with narratives can increase empathy and compassionate attitudes because stepping into a character's place or a real person's story kind of lets us tap into what they experience and what they feel. And I don't know, do you have any thoughts on that?
I've been thinking while you've been talking there, just I mean, there's a reason that people connect with these characters and these stories so much. I'm not necessarily saying Grimm specifically, but just any story that, like think of whatever your favorite TV show or book is it comes down to if it doesn't have well-written characters, you're probably not invested in it. You probably don't actually care about it. A large part of why people love these stories or love stories in general is because of the characters in it. And you want to see your characters succeed. You want to see these people make it through their challenges and triumph. If you don't see that, then you're just not interested in the story. I mean, success can take on several forms in these stories. It doesn't have to be exactly just they all live happily ever after, but you want to see your characters in the end overcome the things that are ailing them in the way that we want to see ourselves overcome these things. Because I think part of the reason we root for these characters is because we root for them because we want to root for ourselves too. But we always feel a little guiltier about rooting for ourselves because we don't have a pre-written story going out for us.
Okay.
So we inspire ourselves off the characters and we root for them because we want to see ourselves succeed as well. And we just work for that.
Excuse me.
You're good.
There is a specific story I wanted to talk to you about. It's not a Grimm's
Okay.
and it's not an Aesop,
Okay.
but I wanted to talk to you about your thoughts on because Disney took this one and well, the word I would use is Disneyed it.
Uh-huh.
And that's The Little Mermaid.
Disneyfication. The
Yeah.
Little
The
Mermaid,
Little
that is a
Mermaid.
crazy one.
If you read Hans Christian Andersen's version of The Little Mermaid, it is definitely not a Disney.
So it's a little bit different. It's a little bit different for sure.
It's a lot different. But do you feel that, like, there is harm being done by Disneyfying some of these fables that are meant to teach us by making it so there's always a happy ending?
I think that that just comes with the modernization and modern worlds of what we live in now. I think that to some extent, kind of, because it gives people the idea that unless they're getting a perfect happy ending to whatever, that unless they're getting that exactly how it should be, then they failed. I do think that that part of it could be considered harmful, but at the same time, I do also believe that as far as Grimm stories go, Hans Christian Andersen stories go, that they're kind of stories that are meant to evolve. They aren't meant to stay stagnant. But like Grimm's stories, I mean Hans Christian Andersen's, I haven't researched those ones as much. They're ones I'd like to get into eventually. I feel like it's probably safe to say that he wrote a lot of those. I'm pretty sure. Grimm's fairy tales are a compilation of other people's stories.
Right.
So, but I still feel like they're both under the same category that they're meant to evolve. They're not meant to stay the same, and that they're meant to be adapted for whatever lesson is trying to be taught at the time. So, like another evolution you see today that people have mixed feelings about would be the turn toward that Disney has, and not really just Disney, but just like movies and media in general has had towards portraying the villain of classic stories as the protagonist now. Like you look at like the Maleficent movies or Wicked or Cruella. They were all good movies, but it's just making I'm not necessarily saying one thing is right or wrong here, but it is one thing that could cause a dividing line between people being like, is this a good thing to be portraying villains as just misunderstood people? And that gets I don't know, that's a dividing line for these stories and modern retellings for sure.
There is a concept that has always kind of intrigued me, and that is that I mean, there's a couple of different sayings. One is everybody's a villain in somebody else's story,
Absolutely,
and another one is nobody sees themselves as
as the
evil.
villain.
Right.
Uh-huh. Exactly.
And
Which
so
is the
that's
approach a lot of
different.
these stories take. Huh?
Yeah, that's different because these stories, oftentimes the villain is the villain. They're evil. They know it. They enjoy it. They roll into that. They really lean into it, and they're proud of being evil. And I'm like, I can't think of any examples through history of someone going, "I'm evil, yay." It's
Huh?
always,
Exactly.
"I'm doing these horrible things for a just cause or for a moral purpose or for some reason, I feel justified in doing these things." Nobody actually looks at themselves and says, "I'm evil," and just runs with that. And we see it in stories, but we don't see it in real life. At least I cannot think of any examples.
Well, see, and that's where I'm saying it's a dividing line for people in that some people really like that take because of exactly that reason, is that there isn't really anyone who just enjoys being evil and does that. Like that's not really a thing we see in the real world. But it blurs the lines as far as the lessons that the stories can teach go. And I think that's where people get divided over it if I'm just looking at the argument about it. But as far as what you were saying there, like personally, if I am going to give my opinion on it, I think it's a lot of fun. I think it's really cool to see these both sides of the stories. And I think as long as you can take away lessons from both, because that is another thing I think is that any side of a story you can learn things from. You don't necessarily have to forget the things you learned from side A to learn things from side B.
No, I
Yeah,
also think I like it when you do the opposite side of the story as well, because one thing that is going to teach is perspective. Because we all have a perspective, but we're given one perspective. Everybody else involved has that one perspective for themselves, and everybody's going to see it a little bit differently. I did an
exactly.
exercise once where I took a class of like 80 people. And I stood in the center, had them all stand in a circle around me. And I'm like, okay, take out your phones. And I want everybody on the count of three to take a picture of me. Not intended to be narcissistic, just to illustrate a point. But
You just want to make sure everyone had a picture of you on their phone
yeah,
so they could
I
look back
wanted
at
to
you and
be
think, dang, what a good looking guy.
okay. Now I want y'all to turn that into the wallpaper on your phone. No,
Yep, yep. There we go.
the point being is after we counted to three and everybody took the picture, I says, okay, now everybody look down at that picture. And I want you to look at your picture and look at the picture on the phone of the person to either side of you. And that's going to be a very similar picture. They might look pretty darn close. You potentially might not even be able to see much of a difference at all, if any. But the further you go away from where you stand in the circle, the more different that picture is going to look.
That's true. Okay.
So the next question I would ask is, okay, who's wrong? Whose picture is lying? Whose picture is wrong? Because it looks different than what you see. So who is wrong? Everybody's going to say, "Well, mine is correct. I was here. I took the picture. I saw it. That's what it is. It's not wrong." But so did the person on the opposite side of the circle who saw things very differently. So I think getting perspective is important.
That's
Understanding that
really
people
interesting. I like that.
Understanding that people don't see themselves as a villain, that they don't see themselves as evil. I think we should take this and push towards understanding other people's perspectives, if for no other reason to help explain why they're doing what they're doing. I can show a lot more forgiveness and compassion for people if I understand why they're doing the things that I might see as hurtful.
Mhm.
Does that make sense? Perspective is
Absolutely.
huge.
I am a huge advocate for, like, you never jump onto something without knowing everything about it. And even then, like, you always take the time to learn why other people are saying or doing the things they're saying or doing.
I
I
hope people do.
100% believe in that. Uh,
Yeah. Anyway, that's just something that popped in my head there that you
no, I
made me
love
think
that.
of.
That's a really interesting exercise, actually. I really like that one.
Yeah. Well, thank you. But
Absolutely.
I think these stories can help teach perspective too. I think some of them are more what I would call a moral sledgehammer. Do this or really, really awful things will happen, and there's not much perspective taught there. But some of
Yeah.
them are teaching perspective, understanding why someone is doing something can help you understand a lot of why they are who they are. So stories are
Everyone
great.
everyone, your hero, your villain, your side characters, the interesting thing about them is that they all have their own individual stories and characters behind them as well. Whether we see that in the story is a different question, but they're all part of the world and they all have their own backstories and stuff as well. So I've always thought that that's something that I'm trying to focus a lot on in my story is the fact that all of the characters are part of the world and they each have their own perspective. because yeah, that's something I really like in stories when they do that.
I like a story where seeing who is necessarily the good guy or the bad guy isn't always clear
Mhm,
because they all have reasons, and I think that's more true to life. But
mhm,
those stories tend to not be about the moral or the lesson so much as they are about people trying to be.
mhm.
They're just trying to exist and be safe and take care of themselves and their own, and they're struggling, and that kind of blurs that line between good guy and bad guy because again, perspective, if you're getting to see everybody's perspective, who's good and bad is not always clear.
No,
Anyway,
100%.
we need to wrap up, but I want to give you a chance to kind of make a closing kind of statement argument, not really argument, but is
Just
there something that you would like to add in conclusion?
I love these stories. I think that they can you could find a story in there to help you with most situations you're dealing with in life. Whether that's going to be a directly applicable story or not, I don't know, but you can find anything in there when you look for them, and you'll find those characters that you can grow to love, you can grow to connect with, and just like you were talking about, you apply that perspective. You look for honestly, I think the perspective thing is the most important thing that we've talked about today because exactly that. These stories are pretty clear cut, but if you take a second to think about it from different perspectives, you can learn all sorts of different things from it. Uh, that goes for any story. So just, yeah, I don't know.
Okay. Well, I want to thank you again. This is your second time here. I love having you. I like your take on things. You're a great guest. I
Well, thank
enjoy
you.
it
I
when you
love being
show up.
here.
Well, good. We might
If you ever need me again, I'm more than happy to come back.
That would be great. All right. Well, I want to thank all of you for coming and listening to another episode of The Pirate Therapist. Please join in next week. Share this with your friends if you found it to be helpful or enjoyable in any way. Always looking for new subscribers. So
Hey, I like that.
you guys have a wonderful week. Lance, thanks for coming again. Congratulations on your engagement.
Woo!
And
Yeah.
yeah, sorry, ladies. Lance McDreamy is off the market.
That's right. That's right.
All right. We'll talk to everybody next week. You take care.
We'll
Bye.
see you. Bye.